There are moments when silence becomes too heavy. You look around, everything seems fine, maybe even good, yet something inside you feels strangely hollow. It's not sadness. It's not boredom. It's that quiet, persistent emptiness that no achievement, no relationship, no pleasure seems able to fill. Carl Jung called this the loss of connection to the self, that inner source of meaning that for centuries humanity used to name God. For Jung, this feeling of inner void wasn't a sign of weakness or failure. It was a spiritual signal, the soul's way of saying, "You've built your life on the surface, now it's time to go deeper." When a person stops believing in something greater than themselves, they begin to orbit around their own ego, endlessly chasing shadows of purpose, and the more they try to explain life only through reason, the more it slips away from them. Jung believed that belief in God, was in any form, wasn't about dogma or religion. It was about relationship, not between man and a distant deity in the sky, but between consciousness and the mystery that created it. Faith, in this sense, is not blind. It's the courage to admit that not everything can be controlled, measured, or understood. It's the willingness to stand before the unknown and say, "Even if I don't understand, I will trust." Modern life has made this trust difficult. We worship logic, efficiency, and success. We've replaced prayer with productivity and silence with constant noise. But in doing so, we've also silenced the deepest part of ourselves, the part that still longs for the sacred. Because whether we admit it or not, the human psyche is built around a center, a divine image, what Jung called the imago Dei. When that center collapses, the personality begins to disintegrate. People lose direction, nations lose soul, and humanity begins to drift like a leaf on a wind that has forgotten its source. And yet, the void isn't our enemy. It's an invitation, the first whisper of awakening. That quiet discomfort you feel is the psyche's way of reaching out, saying, "Remember me." Because the journey toward faith always begins with absence. You can't truly believe in light until you've known what it's like to walk in darkness. So ask yourself, when was the last time you felt that silence inside you? Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that calls, that voice that doesn't shout but waits. Perhaps that's where God still lives, not in the heavens, not in words, but in the space within you that refuses to be filled by anything else. When the outer world stops answering your questions, something within begins to whisper. You may not notice it at first. It arrives disguised as dreams, coincidences, or a sudden sense of being guided by something invisible. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the sacred process in which the human being turns inward, seeking the divine not in temples, but in the depths of the psyche. Jung often said that God is not found by looking upward, but by looking inward. For him, the unconscious was not a place of chaos or repression. It was a vast, mysterious landscape where the roots of the divine grow. Inside it live the archetypes, the primordial images that shape our myths, our desires, our fears. Among them, one shines brighter than the rest, the self, the symbol of wholeness, the image of God within the soul. When you start to listen to your inner world, your dreams, your impulses, your strange coincidences, you begin to feel that something or someone is trying to communicate. Jung called these synchronicities, meaningful events that seem to connect your inner state with the outer world. A song that plays just when you need to hear it. A stranger who says the very words you were afraid to speak. Moments that make you stop and wonder, is this really just chance? For Jung, these are not coincidences. They are messages from the self, signals guiding you toward alignment, reminding you that life is not random. The psyche, he said, is self-regulating. When you drift too far from meaning, it calls you back through symbols, emotions, and even pain. This is the sacred language of the unconscious. It doesn't speak in logic, but in images and patterns that echo eternity. And when you begin to follow those signs, something changes. The world that once felt cold and mechanical begins to shimmer again with mystery. You start to see that the divine was never absent, only hidden behind the veil of your own perception. To seek God, then, is not to escape the world, but to rediscover its depth, It's to realize that every sunrise, every tear, every heartbeat carries a hint of the infinite. But there is danger too. The path inward is not gentle. When you open the door to the unconscious, you invite both the light and the shadow to enter. The more you seek the divine, the more you will be forced to face what stands in its way, your fear, your pride, your hidden wounds. And that is where the true test of faith begins. Because before you can meet the God within, you must first meet the darkness that conceals him. No one ever reaches the light without first passing through the dark. Jung knew this better than anyone. He called it the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when a person begins to see all that they have denied, repressed or pretended not to be. It is not an enemy, but a mirror, one that reflects the parts of ourselves we've refused to love. And it is there, in that dim reflection, that the first real glimpse of the divine often appears. For Jung, the shadow was not only personal, it was also collective. The wars, the hatred, the cruelty that fill the world are not proof that God has abandoned us, but evidence that we have abandoned our inner truth. We push evil away, pretend it belongs only to others, and in doing so, we create monsters outside of us that mirror the ones we've buried within. To believe in God, Jung said, is not to deny evil. It is to face it without losing the soul. True faith does not grow in sterile light. It grows in the tension between opposites, between hope and despair, love and fear, creation and destruction. It is born when a human being dares to hold both darkness and light in the same heart without collapsing into either. That is why the path to God is not a climb upward, but a descent inward. The divine does not hide at the mountaintop. It hides beneath the rubble of our own illusions. When you begin to face your shadow, something sacred happens. You start to see that what you feared most in yourself was never meant to destroy you but to awaken you. Anger reveals your need for justice. Envy reveals your hunger for growth. Fear reveals your longing for trust. Every shadow, when understood, becomes a doorway. And behind each doorway waits a fragment of your lost wholeness, a spark of God disguised as darkness. This is why Jung saw faith not as a belief, but as a process, the process of reconciling what seems irreconcilable. To say I believe in God is to say, I accept that life contains both light and shadow, and that meaning exists in the tension between them. It is to see beauty in imperfection, wisdom in suffering, purpose in chaos. So when your inner world feels like a battlefield, remember, it is not proof of your failure, but of your transformation. God does not speak only through peace. Sometimes he speaks through conflict, doubt, and even despair. Because faith is not born when everything is clear. It is born when everything is dark, and you still decide to move forward. After walking through darkness, something begins to shift. The chaos no longer feels meaningless. Patterns start to emerge, in dreams, in art, in the coincidences of everyday life. It is as if life itself begins to speak a hidden language. Jung called this language symbolic consciousness, the way the psyche bridges the human and the divine through images that point beyond themselves. Symbols are not inventions of the mind. They are revelations of the soul. They rise from the deep waters of the unconscious, carrying wisdom older than memory. Every culture, every civilization has been shaped by them: the cross, the circle, the serpent, the tree of life. They appear in myths and religions because they express something eternal, the attempt of the human spirit to name the nameless. For Jung, the mandala was one of the highest symbols, a perfect circle representing the self, the inner God image that holds all opposites together. To draw or even gaze upon it was for him an act of healing, a silent prayer that unites the scattered parts of the soul. He believed that when we lose contact with symbols, we lose contact with meaning. Modern man, surrounded by facts and data, suffers not from ignorance but from a famine of symbols, a spiritual hunger disguised as anxiety and exhaustion. Symbols are the threads that tie the visible to the invisible. They remind us that what we see is only half of reality. A candle is not just fire. It's the eternal flame that burns in the heart of creation. Water is not just a liquid. It's the flowing spirit that renews and transforms. When you learn to see symbolically, even the smallest moment becomes sacred. And this is where faith deepens, Because faith, for Jung, was never about blind obedience. It was about inner participation in the mystery of existence. To believe in God is to allow these symbols to speak through you, to let them reshape how you see the world. It's to realize that when your heart aches for beauty, when your eyes fill with tears before a sunrise, when you feel awe without knowing why, that's the divine moving through symbols, touching your awareness from within. So look closely at what draws your attention. A recurring dream, a symbol that follows you, a feeling that refuses to leave. The self speaks through these things, not in words, but in patterns and signs. And the more you listen, the more you realize the sacred was never outside of you. It was speaking in your own language all along. There comes a moment when words fall silent. No philosophy, no theology, no explanation can capture what unfolds inside. It is not belief anymore. It is experience. Carl Jung called this the numinous moment, when the presence of something greater touches you so deeply that you no longer question if God exists. You simply feel him, not as an idea but as a living pulse within your being. The numinous cannot be manufactured. It arrives uninvited, during a sunrise, a loss, a melody, or even in solitude, when your soul finally stops running. It fills you with awe and trembling at once. You realize you are both infinitely small and infinitely loved, and in that paradox, something inside you heals. For Jung, this was not a hallucination or delusion. It was a psychological reality, a direct encounter between the conscious ego and the self, the divine center of the psyche. He believed that without this experience, religion becomes empty ritual and life becomes hollow repetition. But with it, everything changes. Every act, every breath, every tear becomes sacred. It is the difference between knowing about fire and being warmed by it. In such moments, you no longer pray for something. You simply exist in prayer. The boundaries between you and the divine begin to dissolve. You sense that life itself is the temple, and every heartbeat an offering. You start to see meaning not as something to be found, but as something that unfolds through you. This experience often comes at a cost. It shatters the illusions you built for safety, the masks, the control, the pride. But in their place arises something pure, humility. You no longer need to define God, because you've met the silence where he dwells. And that silence doesn't frighten you anymore. It feels like home. In the numinous, you don't escape the world. You see it differently. Every person becomes a reflection of the divine, every pain a teacher, every joy a glimpse of eternity. You realize that believing in God was never about adopting a belief system, but about awakening to this hidden current that flows beneath all existence. It's the current that whispers in your soul, you are part of something infinite. And once you've felt it, even for a single heartbeat, you can never return to the old way of seeing, because from that moment on, you know, the sacred is not somewhere else. It is here. It has always been here, breathing through you, waiting to be remembered. At the end of every spiritual journey, you return to the same place, yourself, but you are not the same. Something inside you has changed quietly, profoundly. The chaos has found rhythm. The questions no longer demand answers. You begin to understand what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For Jung, individuation, the process of becoming whole, was inseparable from faith. To believe in God was not to believe in a distant being, but to trust the unfolding of the self within you. The self, he said, is the inner image of God, the organizing principle that draws all the scattered pieces of the psyche into harmony. Every dream, every shadow, every joy, every sorrow, all of it is the raw material of that transformation. Faith, then, is not a destination. It is a movement, a lifelong dialogue between your humanity and your divinity. It asks for patience, humility, and courage. Because to believe in something greater than yourself is also to surrender the illusion of control. You learn to walk, not by seeing the road ahead, but by trusting the step beneath your feet. And that trust, fragile at first, becomes the bridge between your finite self and the infinite. As individuation deepens, you no longer separate the sacred from the ordinary. you see that the same intelligence that shapes the stars also shapes your thoughts. The same mystery that moves the tides also moves your heart. You realize that to believe in God is to believe that existence itself is meaningful, that even your suffering participates in a larger pattern of becoming. What once felt random begins to reveal design. This is the quiet miracle of faith. It doesn't erase pain, but it transforms it. It doesn't promise answers, but it gives strength to live the questions. It doesn't remove darkness, but it lights a candle within it. Through this, the human being becomes a vessel of the divine, a living symbol of reconciliation between the seen and the unseen. And when you finally reach that inner stillness, you understand. God was never lost. He was present in every doubt, every fall, every silence that led you back to yourself. To believe in Him is to believe that love, meaning, and consciousness are not accidents. They are the language of the universe. So you stand in that stillness and breathe, no longer searching for heaven above because you have found it within. Faith has become not a belief, but a way of being, a gentle alignment with the sacred rhythm that has always been guiding you home. Believing in God is believing that life itself is holy, and that your soul, in all its imperfection, was always part of His dream.